Hey everyone, this is Lisa from Life in Layouts, and welcome back to day number 16 of March Madness. Today's page map sketch comes from April of 2016. I pulled out the Riding the Rails collection from Kellybell Designs, and I'm going to be documenting some photos of the Main Street station at Walt Disney World's Railroad. I pulled out a new mat to cut out some of the print and cut features. I'm super excited for this new mat because it is a lot better than the mat that I was using before. I'm going to be using some silver background paper, and then I also pulled out these 3 sheets of paper from the collection. That red and white stripe, the yellow polka dot, as well as this wood grain. I enjoy riding the railroad at Disney World. It takes you around the park, and sometimes if I don't want to walk to the back of the park, I'll jump on the train and take that ride. It's a very nice scenic route. On this particular day, when I got to the station, the train was just leaving, so I had just missed the train. I thought it was a perfect opportunity to take a look around the station. And I don't know that I've really ever paid attention to the station, but there's so many fun things to see. So I decided that I would take a bunch of photos while I was waiting for the next train to get there. So I am going to change up the sketch a little bit. Instead of having a single row of photos in the center, I'm going to double it up for a double row for a total of 16 photos on this layout. Most of the photos are going to be that 2x3 size. I do have a tutorial on how to make your photos smaller using Canva as well as Project Life, and I will link both of them below if you would like to check it out. It makes it so much easier for you to print them out, whether you're at home or if you're printing them from a store. I prefer Walgreens, and it's much cheaper to print one 4x6 that contains 4 photos as opposed to having Walgreens print the wallet size, which is that 2x3 size. I'm going to have 2 large embellishment pieces on this layout. The first one is from the Word Arts, and that one is the one that says Walt Disney Railroad. And then I'm also going to have this page starter that has the train as well as a bunch of other pieces from it. When I put it on my silhouette mat, I moved it over a little bit and I moved it into the area that was not the cut zone. So I did have to cut off just the edge of it. Luckily it was a straight edge because I am not very good at fussy cutting. I then decided to ink up all of the edges that I'm going to use to pop up on my word art as well as my page starter. If I don't put a white border around the edge, I like to ink them up because I don't like the white edge showing. So I just match up whatever the predominant color is on the image and ink up the edges with that color ink. All right, now that I have all of my print and cut features ready to go, I'm going to start to assemble this layout. Just like the sketch calls for, I'm going to be using this wood grain paper as well as the stripe paper as a border around the entire layout. I'm going to have the red and white stripe paper in the background, and then the wood grain paper is going to lay on top of it. Because I always tend to struggle with making sure that things are cut out in the right order, I did do this a little bit different, and it probably took me a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure that the images were cut out properly. I cut both of the stripe paper and the wood grain paper to the same width. They obviously are 11 inches long because that's how much my paper is. And then once I lined it up, then I cut off the wood grain paper to have a small border around the edge. I decided that I wanted to use this yellow polka dotted paper for my tag on the right, but I cut it out at the wrong size. I picked up this tag punch at Hobby Lobby, and I thought it only went to 2 inches, but it actually went to 2.5. So I decided to reprint the yellow paper, but I also needed to reprint the stripe paper because I did not have enough of it. You can see here how much of a difference it makes when it cuts the 2-inch as well as the 2.5-inch with that yellow polka dotted paper. Now that I have the additional striped paper, I can finish the bottom part of the layout. I'm going to use that same technique of cutting the wood grain paper and the striped paper the width that I want it to be, and then just cutting off a little bit of the wood grain so that it is on the inside of that striped paper. I then decided that I wanted to ink up the edges of the wood grain paper And I realized that I used a ton of ink on this. You can see it up there in the upper right hand corner, how many different color inks I used for this particular layout. I'm going to add that red stripe paper 1 inch from the bottom of the layout, and my T-square ruler is 1 inch wide, so it makes it very easy to line that up. Then I'm going to lay the wood grain paper on the top edge of the striped paper so that there's a border on the left hand side and on the bottom side. I'm going to do that for the top as well, but then realized that the striped paper I put on the wrong side of the layout. So I had to pull that up. Luckily, this is some textured cardstock, so it was easy to come up. But now that I have the 4 pieces down on my layout, I'm going to add this white cardstock. Now I know that I said that I was going to not use white as the background, which technically I've not. The background is technically silver. But I felt like I needed this white paper in the center because I have so many photos, and the photos are kind of small, being in that 2x3 size, and the photos have a ton of detail. So I felt like the white cardstock really would make this stand out, as well as I felt like the silver paper, the red and white stripe, and the wood grain paper were all kind of dark. And then by bringing in this white cardstock, it really did lighten up the layout. So now the background of my paper is complete, and I'm going to add this yellow tag over to the right hand side. I do trim it down because I don't need it to go completely underneath the white cardstock. And of course I put it down and there was no adhesive on the back of it, so I had to pull it up, add the adhesive, and then add it back down. Then I'm going to use my corner rounder to round the bottom edges of the tag and add it to the bottom half of the layout. Again, using that same technique of tucking it underneath the white cardstock. I did pull out my T-square ruler so that I could make sure that it was straight on the top and bottom. And then I'm going to try out my page starter on the bottom left of my layout, then adding all of the pieces to it. I did zoom in here so that you can see what I'm doing. For this railroad crossing, this is actually a full railroad crossing sign, but I used the knife tool in the silhouette to cut off the actual pole because I just wanted to have the railroad crossing sign popped up, and then you can see that the pole itself is going to be flat to the image. On the image was a yellow flower, so I'm going to use some foam adhesive to pop that up. And then there is 3 small circles on the train as well. Those circles say chugga chugga choo choo, full steam ahead. And then the red one has the train on it and it says Walt Disney World Railroad. So I did pop up each one of those along the edge of the train. I really love the page starters. There's so much detail and clusters in it, and it makes it really easy to add to your page. You can add just the page starter if you don't like a lot of bulk in your layouts, or you can do what I'm doing by adding some foam adhesive to the back of them and popping up and having some extra dimension on it. I also decided to take the center piece there with the WDW, which stands for Walt Disney World, and pop that up, as well as the Main Street station, which is this station. There are actually 3 stations at Walt Disney World, so you can take the train all the way around Walt Disney World, getting off at each one of the stations and being in different parts of the park, or you could just ride the train and see all of the outskirts of Walt Disney World. And then I also added that all aboard. Now that I have that complete, I'm going to test out where I want to lay my photos. I do have 3 photos that are going to be in the 3x4 size, and then I will have 10 photos that are going to be in that 2x3 size, and then the very last photo is going to be of me. It's a little selfie that I took, and that's going to be in the 3x4 size as well. The photo that's on the very far left-hand side is a stock photo of the train. If you purchase the Memory Maker, which is Disney's PhotoPass, when you take photos around the park in certain areas, they will give you these stock photos. So I got that photo when we took a picture in front of Magic Kingdom where you can see the train in the background. They included that, so I thought that would be nice to have since that's not going to be a picture that I would ever be able to take. I did plan out this layout in Silhouette, so I had an idea of where I wanted all of the pieces to go. But I always make sure that they are going to fit on the layout, because even though I'm planning it out in Silhouette, it's not always 100% accurate. I try to get it as close as possible, but sometimes the images just shift a little bit. And sometimes it just looks different when you print them out as opposed to them being on the computer screen. But once I tried them out, I felt like it was a good placement, and so I decided to go ahead and start laying down my photos. Now you guys know that I love a grid style, but in a grid style, it is so hard to get these photos to be the same size, especially when you're cutting them down on the trimmer. I always struggle with it. So once I got them all down, I did have to pull out my T-square ruler and my X-Acto knife just to trim them up so that I really did have a true grid on these photos. I just pressed lightly with my X-Acto knife against my T-square ruler, making sure that I go through the photos, but not the background of the paper. Once I got all of the photos trimmed out, then I'm going to add my 3 photos over on the far left-hand side. I started out with the train schedule because there was some dead space on either side of the photo, and I knew that I could add the 2 photos next to it and add some fun foam behind them so that they would pop up, and it would give it a little bit of dimension right next to the photo that had that dead space. Once I got the photos down, then I knew that I could add my page starter to the bottom, and it covered up a majority of the bottom area. Again, I cannot say enough about these page starters. There was very little that I had to add to this. You don't have to add any additional, but look how much interest it adds to the bottom of the layout. I'm then going to take the word art that says Walt Disney World Railroad and add it over to the far right-hand side. That is going to be my title. The sketch calls for the title to be over a little bit, kind of where that tag is, but because my title is so large, I needed to move it over to the left so that it would fit. Most of my element pieces come from the main kit, but I also did bring in some of the pieces from the word Flair to include that tag that says to the trains, as well as the 1-inch circles that I'm going to add to the layout. Now I do add an offset to most of my embellishments. You can see those specifically over on the left-hand side with those florals. The elements themselves come flush to the image. So if I was to cut it out without that offset, it would not have the white border. I prefer the white border, so I do add that in silhouette before I print it out. I added 3 of the flowers, as well as a star, a conductor's hat, and then the railroad crossing sign. I did add these 1-inch circles to my bottle caps. I purchased these from Hobby Lobby, but they're no longer available. However, I have found them on Amazon, and they are linked below in my Amazon storefront. If you print out the Flair pieces in 1 inch, they will fit perfectly in these bottle caps. I do not print those out with an offset because I do want those to go to the edge of that bottle cap. I feel like the bottle cap gives it that offset look. I did have a little bit of trapped space underneath the photo, so I decided to add a little embellishment cluster there. I started out with this blue flower, and I did curl up the edges and add some foam adhesive to part of the flower so that parts of the flower will stick up. And then this is one of those classic examples where I had this planned out and it looked really good on the computer, but then when I was actually laying it down, especially with the details of my photos, I was struggling with the placement. So I had to move around a couple of the pieces because I did have the embellishments overlap my photo a lot more, and it just wasn't going to work with that particular photo. So I did end up adding the star as well as that little pocket watch. But I did have to forego the scenic route, which I really wanted to add that, but it was just way too large. I probably could have recut it in a smaller size, but it's one of those things that once you get going, it's like, I don't want to go back to my printer and print things out again. So I just foregoed it for this layout. I did add the photo of myself up on Fun Foam just to give it a little bit of dimension with all of those photos that are right next to it. Up there where the tag is, I am going to add another bottle cap, and it's going to have a blue circle in it that says Magic Train Ride. There are lots of blue elements in this collection, but for whatever reason, I stayed away from them except for a couple of pieces, like the conductor's hat and those flowers, as well as that circle. So I'm gonna make some changes to the layout at the end. I did pull out my jute twine and add it to the top of my tag. And I did pull out my glue dots to add to the bottom parts of my tag, just to make sure that they stayed in the place that I placed them. I tried again to add that scenic route, but it just was not happening. But I did end up adding a little red tag that says choo choo. I pulled out my wood veneer and added an arrow up at the top, as well as 2 stars to the left-hand side of the cluster. I also pulled out my color boxes in red, yellow, and blue and added some enamel dots to each one of the clusters. I also decided to add a couple of enamel dots on the page starter just to add some extra dimension to that as well. And at this point, I felt like I was done with the layout. There are times when I sit and just look at the layout and I'm like, it's missing something. Can't figure out what it was. And I am sad to admit that I spent a significant amount of time looking at this layout trying to figure out what it was. But I finally decided that it didn't have enough blue. So I print out this blue white stripe paper from the collection and I used my border punch to add a border to the edge of it. And I'm going to add this blue stripe paper on the bottom of the layout underneath the white cardstock. This is one of those times when the idea of having that extra blue far outweighs the struggles that I'm about to have with adding it down to my layout. On the right-hand side of the layout, it was pretty simple because there wasn't much there, just that tag. So I just had to cut it in half and add it to the layout. For the left-hand side of the layout, I sped this up so much because I wanted to show you how much it really struggled to get this blue and white stripe paper down, and it was a lot. I had to pull up pieces of that page starter to get it down on the left. And it did take me quite a while to get it down on the left. Then I added it to the right-hand side of the page starter and I was good to go. When I went to look at it, I was like, the left-hand side is shorter than the right. So I had to pull it back up, fuss around with it. I actually had to pull out another piece because it wasn't long enough. But I finally got it. And I will say that the blue stripe paper does add a lot to this layout. Alright guys, so I'm working on my batch journaling and I came to this particular layout and I was going to do some strips, but then realized that I wanted to say a lot more than I probably have room for in my strips. So I thought that I would go ahead and use some of the digital content from Kellybell Designs to create a journal card. And I wanted to show you guys how I do that. So I'm going to create this in Canva because I find that that's the easiest. I do have the paid version, but you could absolutely do this with the free version. I'm going to go over to the left-hand side and select Create a Design. I'm going to select Custom Size. And then my recent custom size, I usually just select 8.5 by 11. But if you do not have a recent size, 8.5 by 11 down here, you can create that by selecting your width and height. You do need to change your units from px to inches, and then just type in 8.5 by 11 and create a new design. Now that the new design has opened up, I'm going to go over to my upload options. I already have the paper that I want to use. However, if you do not have your paper stored in your uploads, you can select the upload files at the top, locate your digital images on your computer. This is the digital paper that I'm going to be using today. So you would select that and select open. Once it uploads, it should be in your upload section on the left-hand side. You will need to click on the digital image to bring it into your file. Now that I have it on my paper, I'm going to resize it to fit my image. I do that by selecting the position at the top. You want to make sure that your ratio is locked, and then you can change your width to whatever size you need. I need a 3x3 image. So I'm going to select 3 for the width, and it will automatically change my height to 3. I'll then select enter, and it will make my image 3x3. I'm going to zoom in so that I can see the image just a little bit easier. What I want to do is have a box in the center of this image. The only thing that I want showing is these little flowers on the outside edge. I'm going to do that by going over to the left-hand side and select elements, and then I'm going to select the square shape. That's going to bring in my square shape, and I'm going to move it so that it overlays the digital paper. Now, I don't want this centerpiece to be pink, so I'm going to select the circle at the top, and that's going to bring in the color palettes. The great thing about Canva is it does bring in your photo colors, so I can very easily choose one of these colors that Canva has selected for me. I'm not liking any of these colors. I want it a little lighter than what these colors are offering. So I can choose a color from this image by selecting the color picker, which is in the top left, and then selecting this pick a color. Then I'm going to hover over my image until I find a color that I like. And I'm looking for almost a white, maybe like a gray or a light color. And I like this color here. This is again personal preference, so you choose whatever color you want for your centerpiece. I'm then going to go over to the position, which is in the upper right, and I'm going to change this square to about 2.75. That's what I think is going to give me the right dimensions on the inside, but I may have to play around with it a little bit to get it to fit how I prefer. I'm then going to select both images by taking my mouse and scrolling over both of the images. And then over on the left in the Align Elements, I'm going to select Middle and Center to put the top square on top of the digital paper. And now I have a box over this digital paper and it looks more like a journaling box. I have a lot to say, so I'm not going to add anything else on this particular page except for my journaling, but you can go back over to your uploads and select additional options. So maybe I wanted to add this Main Street station, resizing it a little bit to fit on my paper. And then you have a smaller space to put in your journaling. So maybe if you don't have a lot of journaling and you want to add additional elements, you can absolutely do this and create your own journaling cards. I'm going to remove the Main Street station because I don't want it on mine. And then I'm going to double click in the color box until I get a cursor. And then I can start typing my journaling. Obviously, my journaling is much too large for my box, so I'm going to go in and make some personal preferences in regards to my font as well as my size. I'm going to highlight my journaling. Going up to the top, I can choose multiple options for my font. I do get questions often about my font. My preferred font is called Shadows Into the Light, so I'm going to select that. And it's still way too large, so I'm going to move my font size down until it fits. At the size 10, it fits, but there's still a lot of space, and I do want it as big as possible. But when I go up to size 11, you can see that my box is a little bit bigger. So I'm going to try 10.5, which I do have to type this in. And that allows my box to be the size that I want it, but it does make the font just a little bit bigger. I'll then go over to the share option in the upper right-hand corner, select the download option. My file type needs to be PDF print, and then select download. I'll then locate the PDF on my computer. I like to open my PDFs with Microsoft Edge. Going over to the right-hand side, I'm going to select print. When my print options appear, I'm going to select the more settings. I'm going to change it to actual size. This is going to allow it to print at that 3x3 that I want. I'm then going to use the print using system dialog. And from here, I'm going to select more settings. These are my personal preference, but you'll need to play around with your own printer to decide what personal preferences you like. I do have my personal preferences saved as digital paper, and that means that it's going to print at borderless printing. My media type is going to be matte photo paper. My print quality will be high, and then I can select OK. And then I'll select print, and then the image will print out and I can add it to my layout. All right, guys, that is it for this video. Here is my final layout as well as some close-ups. As I was editing the video, I did realize that I spelt Walt's name W-A-L-K, so I did have to change that. But my journaling says, Walt Disney was a noted train enthusiast. He built his very first railroad in his backyard. So visiting the Main Street USA station is a must. This station was alive with the charm and nostalgic that Disney is known for, with its carefully curated memorabilia offering a glimpse into the history of the railroads. It was clear that every aspect had been designed with love and a deep appreciation for the magic of trains. These photos give me a connection to Walt Disney's vision and passion for railroads. All right, if you enjoyed this video, if you wouldn't mind giving me a thumbs up, I would really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already and you want to see more double page layout inspiration, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope that you have a scrappy day.